Welcome to our largest unit thus far. It is our cognitive psychology unit, Unit 5. This is clumping together the old Unit 8, I believe, or maybe it was 7 for cognition, and then the intelligence and testing unit. So we're lumping two chapters in your book together, so make sure when you are looking at reading guides, you look at the page numbers that you're supposed to be on. Our first video, however, is going to be on an introduction to memory. Because this unit is so big, we're going to break down the unit into different concepts, okay? So the first thing we're going to start with is memory. This includes the encoding, storage, and retrieval of memories. Then our second concept is forgetting, and then errors in memory as well. Third is thinking and language. These are pretty short, so we're going to lump them together. And then finally, the intelligence unit. So those are the 4 different sections of this unit that will all be on the Unit 5 test. We will quiz each one of these concepts separately, okay? So let's talk about memory. Memory is the reason why you know who your friends are. You know the English language. It's why you know all the lyrics to your favorite song. It's why you know who you are. Memory is critical into making you into the person that you are. So memory is defined as any indication that learning has persisted over time, okay? So it's our ability to store, not only like store the information, but then also retrieve it, so take it back. We're going to start with kind of like a intense memory, and those are called flashbulb memories. Flashbulb memories are these highly emotional moments in life, and then they give rise to a very persistent and strong and clear memory. However, this memory is not free from errors. We just tend to remember it pretty strongly. Flashbulb memories, a lot of them are pretty big events. So, for example, 9/11, most people can remember exactly where they were when they first remembered or heard about 9/11. It might be your first kiss could be a flashbulb memory. If something traumatic happened in your life, that could be a flashbulb memory. But all of these things are strong emotional moments. So the flashbulb memory has that emotion tied to it. So for example, the birth of my children is pretty clear in my mind because it was such a strong emotional experience, and then those memories stick around pretty clearly. However, like I said, they are not free from errors. We'll talk about that later. So the different stages of memory, like we talked about first. First is encoding. And this is the idea of actually like creating a memory. So this is you going through an experience, okay? This is like when you're typing up a report, okay? So this is the process of creating a memory. The next process, which goes in sequential order, is storage. This is when you would save your report. So let's say you're working on your extended essay. Encoding is you typing up your extended essay. Storage is saving it. Now we have saved it to a flash drive, you saved it to OneDrive, you saved it to your computer, saved it in multiple places, right? That's the storage of a memory. And then finally, retrieval is when we would go back when you want to work on it again, and you're going to pull it back up from your computer. You're going to go into the folder that it's in and pull it up, and now you have your extended essay saved for you. However, it's easy to think of this process in terms of computer storage, but our brain is not a computer. We do not remember things exactly how they were stored and encoded because there are a lot of things that play a role when we are storing and encoding memories. And we're going to talk about those things. So the first model of information processing we're going to talk about is the 3-stage process of memory. This was put out by Atkinson and Shiffrin. This is important for IB as well as AP. So you are going to want to know this model, okay? Atkinson and Shiffrin in 1968 came up with this model. There's 3 stages of memory. The first is sensory memory. And this is our very short-term memory, right? Very, very, very short. So this is the idea of like the sensory information coming in. Short-term memory are things we pay attention to, And then we have we store in our brain for a short period of time. And then finally, we have our long-term memory. We're going to talk about working memory in a little bit. But long-term memories, again, are long-term storage in our brain of those memories. So let's break this down. So first, sensory memory. Sensory memory is the initial momentary storage of info. This only lasts an instant. Think about your senses. Unless you specifically think about them, that information isn't going to be stored, right? So like the information that you are seeing all over the place, you're not going to store that information unless you actually pay attention to it. So we have sensory information given to us. We are taking everything all in, and then our brain decides if it's important enough for us to pay attention to. If the info is not that important, it's passed on. It's lost. This is called decay or displacement of memory. Think of sensory memory as kind of like a snapshot, okay? It's like a constant replay. Think of like CCTV, right? When you're watching like your Nest camera on, or like your Ring doorbell camera, like that information is there for a moment, but then it's gone. Okay, if it's not safe, it's just gone. It's there for a moment. You're watching the information and you're watching it in real time, and then it's gone. Okay? So here's some evidence of sensory memory. It would be of sparklers, right? Does the sparkler actually make these letters? No, right? We only see the sparkler in this point for just a moment, but then the picture captures that because now we've paid attention to it, okay? Short-term memory. Short-term memory holds information only for a short period of time, and this has to be meaningful information. We have to pay attention to it. Usually our short-term memory lasts about 30 seconds, okay? And we have a very limited capacity in our short-term memory. About 7 items. That is a magic number. 7 is important to God, so it should be important to psychologists as well, okay? So 7 items plus or minus about 2 that we can keep in our short-term memory at for a very short period of time. Basically, this is the idea. This is like kind of the waiting room we talk about, right? This is the place that kind of stuff is in there for just a short period of time, and then we decide if we want to keep it or not. We can store more information, more than these 7 items, if the information is chunked or grouped together. So for example, you would never be able to remember all of these letters. However, once I chunk them into meaningful groups, right, we can tell that now they are television channels, right? PBS, Fox, CNN, ABC, CBS, MTV, NBC. We can remember that because now we have 7 different items here. But here we have all of these letters individually, and our short-term memory would not be able to remember all of those. If we do not rehearse the information, okay? So rehearsal is the repetition of the information. If we do not rehearse it, the information will leave our short-term memory. Think about it. If you need to get a phone number, you have to like repeat it over and over again until you have to write it down, right? Because that is your rehearsal. You have said that phone number over and over and over again in order for your short-term memory to keep it in there until it needs to go somewhere else. And that either goes to your long-term memory or it is decayed or displaced if you don't need it anymore. Okay? Long-term memory. Long-term memory is the memory that stores information on a relatively permanent basis. Okay? It appears, psychologists believe that it kind of has a limitless capacity. We don't really have a limit to how much we can store in our long-term memory. We file our long-term memories into different categories so that when we retrieve it, we can retrieve it, you know, at the moment we need it. Long-term memory, however, I go by we use the phrase, if you don't use it, you lose it. So eventually, those long-term memories are going to be discarded if they aren't used. So there's some problems with this model. First, some information skips those first two steps, right? Some things enter our long-term memory automatically. Some things we don't need to pay attention to. They just stay there. Think of implicit memories, or those kind of implicit learning that we do, that latent learning, right? We're not paying attention to it. It just kind of happens. Like how to turn a steering wheel. No one really you didn't really have to pay attention to that, but you noticed it over time, and now it's in your long-term memory. Number two, since we cannot focus on all of our sensory information in the environment, we select information through attention. That is important. So we have selective attention, and it is important for us to have selective attention, or our brain would be fried, right? We choose what to focus on. And then finally, three, the nature of our short-term memory is much more complex than just it sitting in that little area and waiting to go either to long-term memory or to be displaced. So working memory was Baddeley and Hitch then came up with working memory model. And what they did is they expanded on the three-stage model to include working memory and automatic processing. Okay? Working memory is a newer understanding of short-term memory. And what this does is it adds a conscious, active processing of incoming sounds and sights. And it's also information that is coming back from long-term memory. Okay, so it's the information that's coming in, so our auditory and visual information, but it's also information that's coming back from our long-term memory. So it's kind of the place that we go to work together to make sense of it. Okay, so working memory is the processing area. Okay, so it's where we process information. Short-term memory model is the idea that it just kind of sits there. We're just paying attention to it. Working memory is the idea that we're processing the information that's in our conscious state right now. Okay. This model also said that short-term memory has multiple components. The first is a central executive. The central executive controls our slave systems, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. But our central executive controls our attention, both at the automatic level, right? Those automatic habit or routine procedures. But it also does the supervisory attention level, so unique situations, so things that are new that we have to pay attention to. It tells us where to look. It tells us what we should be listening to, okay? So that's one part of short-term memory. But the second is the slave systems. And these slave systems are controlled by the central executive. The central executive tells which slave system should be working at once. The first is the episodic buffer. This is the temporary and passive display store when trying to recall a scene or a sound. Okay, so this is our ability to close our eyes and picture a room or think of a song. Okay, so our episodic buffer allows us to bring back information from our long-term memory of previous scenes or sounds. Our phonological loop is our inner voice. This is our ability to talk to ourselves in our mind. We all do it. We all hear that voice in our head. Some maybe sounds like your mom. Some maybe sounds like your dad. Maybe it sounds like CY. Who knows? And then finally, our visuospatial sketch pad. This is our inner eye. This is our ability to really close our eyes and be able to do work out an issue. This is what I talk about, like when you are doing mental math and you can visualize the problem happening in the air, right? That's our visual spatial sketch pad. The working memory model explains our ability to multitask. The central executive is taking control of these automatic things that are happening, and we are having all of these components taking place at the same time. Here is a nice visual to kind of tell us this idea. Here's the central executive. Information is going back and forth between the long-term memory and the central executive and our slave systems.